UNICEF estimate 150 million kids living on the streets globally. And if you think that's the population of France and England and Britain combined, that's a huge number.
Welcome to Collab, a podcast series about issues and trends in international development and humanitarian crisis response. Joining today is John Wroe, Swansea City Football Club superfan and co-founder and CEO of not-for-profit Street Child United. His organisation uses the power of sport and the arts to challenge the negative perceptions and treatment of millions of street children around the world. Their flagship initiative is the Street Child World Cup, an international football tournament uniting teams of street children to play football and call for their rights to be realised. What can John's experience teach others about working with sports stars, funders, governments and partners, and how to take public passion for something and focus it on a pressing issue? John, welcome.
Thank you very much, Phil. Delighted to be here.
Hey, to kick us off, tell us about your background, a little bit about where you grew up. What was your family life like?
Well, born in Swansea and grew up in a son of my parents worked at a Welsh Congregational church. So we lived in a manse. My surname is Wroe, and people called it the Romance.
Fantastic.
3 brothers. We moved to England when I was 11 from my native Wales. It was a very welcoming house. I always remember, I'm thinking now, the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine was always important for Dad. And growing up, we had Ukrainians and Hungarians staying with us all the time. We had links with the Dutch Reformed Church in Eastern Europe. And after he died, my brother Martin and I went out to Ukraine, and they dedicated a wing of a church in his name and also an orphanage that he'd supported all his life. So I sort of think, the things I've got involved with doing, it's almost out of habit from the way I was brought up. The family just was in a position to do that sort of stuff. It was a busy manse, and it was constantly welcoming people. And Dad had he'd done his national service, so he was quite international for someone from South Wales. He'd been in Palestine and in Cyprus and in Egypt, and was interested in the world.
And that rubbed off on you.
Yeah, it really did, on all of us. So we're living in England, supporting Swansea, and he's a huge Swans fan as well. So my first football memories were basically going to away games, and this is in the 70s. And there were quite turbulent times watching football. I can remember going to Northampton was the first one, and we lost 6-0. And I can remember going to the Loos at half-time, and I was like 11, and seeing a lot of blood on the floor. And I was thinking, what on earth happened here? And then this realisation that, there was clearly a fight here just before I arrived. and it's funny how these things stick in your memory. And then Watford, because we were living near Oxford, we'd always go to Watford to see the Swans. And I can remember one time, pushing Dad up against the wall because there were bricks and tins and bottles flying over the wall onto the away supporters,
Wow.
And I can remember being at Leyton Orient with him, and I knew one of the Leyton Orient players, and he'd got us tickets in the stand. And we jumped up when we scored, and the whole stand seemed to turn on us. And Dad, he's a pacifist. He's United Reformed Church minister. He said, "John, quick, swap seats with me. Swap seats. Get me away from these people." So the memories of football growing up really were about, surviving, and the element of danger and the excitement of it. It was so different from the rest of our lives. But also, doing that with Dad and my brothers was just
wonderful.
Great. And giving Mum a rest on Saturdays.
Before we talk about Street Child United, tell me about the problems facing street kids globally. How many are there thought to be? Is it getting worse or better? What are the issues?
UNICEF estimate 150 million kids living on the streets globally. And if you think that's, that's the population of France and England and Britain combined, that's a huge number. And because of climate crisis, because of increases in poverty, it is getting worse. So it's a huge, huge issue. And I suppose the issues for street children are about having identity. So 72% of street children globally don't have birth certificates. So they don't actually officially exist. And if you don't have identity, then you can't access education. You can't have a job. You can only have an informal job. You can't pay taxes. You can't be married. You can't be buried. You can't have access to health. So identity is really key. So our main campaign is called I Am Somebody, and it's about identity. We also campaign around protection from violence. So again, if you don't have identity, no one's going to protect you. If you don't actually exist, no one will protect you. No one will step in. We also campaign around access to education and gender equality. The four pillars of what we do, and they're very much about what street children have told us are the issues that are most important to them, and why we hold a Street Child World Cup to amplify their voices on these important issues.
John, what's the origin story of Street Child United?
We live in Cambridge. There were four families, Cambridge and London. We volunteered at an organisation run by former street children. It was the holiday of a lifetime. We called it Street Kids Surfing and Safari. My big brother Martin sort of corralled us together and said, right, we're all going to South Africa. We're going to volunteer at this organisation. I'm going to take a youth worker with us to help us process what happens.
So what year was that?
That was 2008. Yeah. And it changed all of us. And we played soccer. We held braais. We did cleaning. And we would play football on the beach. And I can remember one time we'd had this game and we'd had this braai. And we had corn on the cobs, and we'd eaten all the corn on the cobs with the kids, and we'd put them in the bin. And then we played football. And then after the game, the kids went to the bin to get the corn on the cobs we'd already eaten to eat for a second time. It was just the husks. And it's like, I can't believe this, compared to what our experience had been in life and all the luxuries and privileges we've had. And I suppose it was trying to figure out what to do with this sense of injustice that's right in front of you and how to respond creatively. And Dilo was one of the boys we played football with, and he just said a throwaway comment. He said, when people see me on the streets, they say I'm a street child. But when they see me playing soccer, they say I'm a person. I'm a person like you. Just by wearing that jersey, playing, he's a defender. He's a midfielder. He's an attacker. He's a footballer. He's a person. He's not a street child. And then our kids came back to Cambridge, did school assemblies, and at one, a young girl put her hand up and said, look, the first FIFA World Cup in Africa is happening in 2010. Why can't street children have a World Cup? And we just thought that is a great idea, along with my friend Adrian Reith. We just thought, how can we use this to keep the issues that are important into the public spotlight? Access to education, protection from violence, gender equality, and identity. And we just thought, that is a brilliant idea. Let's organise a World Cup for street children. So we did it on March 21st, 2010. We invited teams from all over the world, so selecting the very best projects that are working with street children, to Durban. We held it at the Steve Biko campus of the Durban University of Technology on South African Human Rights Day, March 21st, 2010. And India beat Tanzania on a penalty, on a disputed penalty, which
They were
Tanzania is
robbed.
still really cross about. Yeah, they were. But what we hadn't anticipated was the reaction the teams would get when they went home. So within the 10 days when we were together, it wasn't just playing football. We also held arts activities. So we had a big exhibition at the main gallery in Durban that continued throughout the FIFA World Cup. And we also had a congress on children's rights. And we had facilitators to enable and translators to help the children find their voices. And then we had a general assembly where the young people spoke about what change they wanted to bring about. But when they got home, like Tanzania, they arrived in Dar es Salaam. They're from Mwanza, which is on Lake Victoria. And they arrive in Dar, and they're met by the Tanzanian FA. And what they hadn't realized is their national news had followed their story every night. So everybody knew them. They had an open bus tour of Dar es Salaam. These kids that just go and play, wearing their Tanzania shirts, street kids. And instead of going to Mwanza, they went to Dodoma, where the national parliament of 650 MPs was temporarily suspended to welcome them back. I was like,
fantastic.
My goodness me, what just happened? And suddenly you saw the magic. And it was that people that are normally ashamed of street children, they're embarrassed by them, are suddenly proud of them because they're representing their country and they take an interest in them and they're on their side. And then you can work with them and with governments to bring about change on the issues that are important to them.
How did you fund that first event?
It's a World Cup. You're bringing youngsters from all over the world without passports, without birth certificates, passports or visas. I always say the whole world conspires with us to make it happen. I went to South Africa from Cambridge 12 times in the preparation. The British Council were really helpful. There's a woman just got it. She said, I get this. And she found the venue for us. She also found a place called the Star Seaside Home, where everybody stayed, which was owned by the Star newspaper in Joburg. And Rohini Naidu was her name. And when you find these people that get it, they go out their way to make it happen. It was called the Deloitte Street Show World Cup. So we had an early decision. We had friends at Deloitte in London and in Switzerland, so a senior partner in Switzerland, and he persuaded London and South Africa to come on board. They said, we said we needed £60,000. And they said, okay, if we give you 100,000, could we have naming rights? And we said, yep, of course you can. Because it wasn't just about the money, which we needed. It was also about the recognition. If it's Deloitte, it's sort of like, there's your reputation established. People trust that it will happen if you call it the Deloitte Street Show World Cup. And it really worked. But also volunteers, so people came to the Street Show World Cup, they paid their flights and they raised some money towards it. And then a few trusts and foundations. But for the first 2 or 3 events, 3/4 of the funding for the event came in 3 months before the event. As an organization, it took a lot of faith and trust. And we got to a few treasurers.
Yes. So the magic was the wonderful idea. People can understand it straight away. The power of football, an sense of excitement, and obviously great communication of that to people.
Yeah, a simple idea created by a child. It's a World Cup for kids that live on the streets. And I think people get the sense of adventure of it and the sense of, putting those that normally last first, sort of turning the values upside down. And they recognize, that, these are kids that have never been on a plane. They've never left their cities. And, just what that means. We had a team from Ukraine. And they arrived in Durban with their puffer jackets on. And it was like 35 degrees. And it was like, they were so wrapped up, and they'd never seen people of color. They'd never seen the sea. They didn't speak any English. And they're from Kharkiv. And I can remember speaking to one of them at the General Assembly, saying, what do you remember? What was the best bit about it? And he said, the arts exhibition. The arts exhibition. There was a photo of him in the sea, and he looked like a model. He just had a pair of shorts on. It just looked fantastic. But he said, what I realized, he said, I always thought being on the streets was my fault. And now I realize that this is a global issue, that there's kids all over the world. And he said, I've stopped blaming myself for being on the streets. And I thought that was a really good insight and realization for that young man.
That's wonderful. So the next few years, the organization starts to grow. What did that look like? How has it matured? What were the important things that took you through? And I gather you have had sports stars and football players, famous ones, involved and wanting to be involved too, yeah?
I think it's just dogged determination sometimes. If I think back to Rio, so we did, in football, we did South Africa, then Rio, then Moscow, then Qatar. And then after Rio, we also did a Streetcar Cricket World Cup. So, and we also did a Streetcar Games, Streetcar Olympics. What got us through? I think one of the key things was to give it away. It doesn't belong to us. It's everybody's. And so if you're hosting a Streetcar World Cup, you probably only get to do it once in your life. And I want it to be the most memorable experience of your life. And when we went, Adrian, our friend, got a message to the Pope somehow. And so we all, 600 of us, had Cristo to ourselves for 4 hours. We were the only people up there. And Adrian was there. We had a drone taking photos of us. And Adrian was next to the drone operators. He understood what it would mean to have a photo of all of us at Cristo with Christ the Redeemer. I remember thinking, that's what the Streetcar World Cup is. We give it away. We're not arms crossed. This is yours. This is yours. Embrace it. It's such a wonderful thing. You can't keep this to yourself.
And each event got bigger and bigger with the recognition?
My whole thing is everyone's on the side of these young people. Everybody wants to support them. So one of the people we met quite early was Alistair Campbell, funnily enough. I bumped into him, and I'd been reading his diaries. And I just said, hi, Alistair, I'm a Swansea fan. And he just said, you buggers, we'd equalised against Burnley, his team, that week in 3rd minute of injury time. He says, Justin, you buggers. I said, look, I'm organising this World Cup for street children. Can I tell you about it? Told him a few things. Here's my email, drop me a line. And as a result of that, he ghost wrote 3 articles for Sir Alex Ferguson at the time, a Sun newspaper, 6 million readership, about that first Streetcar World Cup. And his son also came and volunteered with us. And he's always been supportive. And he just gets it as a football fan, as a father, as a humanitarian. And I suppose because he responded so well, I kind of think anyone I meet, I want to try and draw them in. So we've had, one of my favourite ambassadors is Gilberto Silva. So he's an Arsenal Invincible World Cup winner. And he was with us in Brazil for the whole time. He came to Moscow with us. He was with us in Qatar. And again, anything I ask Gilberto, he gives it good consideration and usually does it. I try not to make too many asks of these people, but I know they're there for us when we need them. And you help him use their platform to amplify the voices of our young people is great. We had some time with Mr. David Beckham in Qatar, which was quite phenomenal. Because again, he's with our young leaders. So after Brazil, we developed this young leaders program, and they're the best assets we've got. They're just all brilliant. They do a 2-year leadership program. So he had a few hours with them, and they all got to ask him 2 questions. And I remember Dana, who's one of the young leaders from Bolivia. And I didn't know what she was going to ask. And she said to him, David, and she's speaking Spanish. She says, could you tell me who the real David Beckham is? We know David Beckham from Instagram, but who's the real David Beckham? And he goes, well, first and foremost, I'm a father. I've got 4 children. My job's to raise my children in the right way. And I want them to be more like you. I want them to know about service, about determination, about hard work, about communication. You really inspire me, and I want you to inspire them. And then the second question was, what's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to you? And she's speaking in Spanish. She buys a bit of time and says, the way you speak Spanish, he was at Real Madrid for 6 years. He says, the way you speak Spanish is incredibly beautiful, Dana. So, but growing up, my parents told me they loved me every single day. And that's the most beautiful thing anyone can ever say to you. And I just thought, good on you. You couldn't have scripted better answers. And he was like that for all the young leaders. And I was just enormously impressed by him. Someone like David Beckham, helping us to tell the story is great. Someone like Mr. Beast. So he's a YouTuber. He's probably the biggest YouTuber in the world. And they helped us get some identity documents for some of the teams. And then they helped us bring the teams from South America over to Doha. And 2 of the guys from Mr. Beast's team went down to Rio and Fortaleza and came over with the team. And they made a little video about it. And the first weekend they were, we were chatting to them and said, how's it gone? They said, well, we're a bit disappointed. It's only had 10 million views this weekend. So I think, really? And I don't know, they're sort of chance communications, but it's about approaching people in the right way and finding the way into them. We've had one this week with, there's an Asian footballer who's just signed on loan from Leicester to Sheffield United. He's started playing for Bangladesh. We just got in touch and said, would you consider helping us tell the story of Team Bangladesh? They're a phenomenal project. And the leader of that project, he gets legal identities for the kids that come. He works with the Supreme Court, and he's managed to work to remove the need for both parents to be present when they apply for birth registration. So that's a barrier for us. If you need both parents present, these are chaotic lifestyles. Those kids, probably aren't going to get registered. So they've removed that need. In the lead up to the last World Cup, he did that. And that's a win for millions of street children in Bangladesh. But he's called Forhad. So he brings 10 youngsters to the project. If he can't get identities for all the kids, he adopts them. So he's actually legally adopted 30 children to make sure they all come to the street child program. Now, what a great story to tell. What a great story to be able to tell a footballer. Can you help us tell this story? And that footballer isn't going to say, no, I don't want people to know. They're going to say, oh, that's a privilege. That's an honor. I want to do that. So this footballer is called Michael Chowdhury. We've only had the conversation this week, but he's agreed to join us as an ambassador.
That's amazing. So you've talked about giving it away, about drawing people in, amazing storytellers. How do you measure impact? I mean, you've obviously told me stories and you've alluded to a few things. How do you feel about impact, and how do you know you're making impact where you want to be?
We measure the impact 3 months, 6 months, 12 months through the project leaders. So the key thing is we don't choose the young people that come. We choose the projects. So it's about identifying the very best projects that can show us they can support young people before, during, and after. And then they're in touch on an ongoing basis with the young people themselves. It's interesting seeing how the projects have got stronger and bigger and better as a result of this, because we have a global summit a year before every event, and we bring all the leaders together, normally 2 of them, wherever the World Cup is. And it's just been great watching them grow and be more influential and be able to expand the services that they offer. So we use an organization called Upshot to do the M&E, and it's mainly questionnaire based. But people often say to us, what happens afterwards? What happens after the Street Show World Cup to these young people? And that's one of the reasons we've developed our Young Leaders program. So we have a leadership program that 2 youngsters on each of the projects are elected to join. And it's wonderful now seeing them as adults. So someone like Sadak, who's the one that's still cross about the Indian penalty, and that was 2010. He's now gone through the Young Leaders program, and he's at University of West England. We've got a partnership with UWE. They send volunteers to each of our events, and now he's in the 3rd year of a 4-year program studying international business there. So I always think the young leaders are the litmus test in terms of the impact that we're having.
So what reflections do you have about other NGOs? Is there anything they can learn from you in your experience, the way you've built and developed this?
We've managed to stay small. Now, some people might say, well, that's not very good. But we've generally been a 5-a-side team. And now, as we get closer to each event, we go up to about 11-a-side, and then we go back down to 5-a-side. We have volunteers, probably about 100 at each event, that help us deliver the event itself. But we've kept our overheads really small. So our turnover is about £400,000 a year. And we receive half our funding from an international schools group, that the ISP. We couldn't, survive without their fantastic support. And they have 70 schools globally, and they put a levy on their fees of $10, €10 or £10 that comes towards us. And it's a very simple thing. And our young leaders go and do school assemblies for them. Their teachers and other staff come and volunteer at our events. And I suppose we're trying to teach them about their young people about empathy, which is sort of key to leadership. How can you walk in somebody else's shoes? Walk in the shoes of a street child for a few days and see how that helps you to grow and develop and learn. So I think it's a really serious thing we're doing, but also keep it light. It's an adventure. We talk about the World Cup of hope, the World Cup of joy, the World Cup of peace. And you've got to keep the joy there. I think one of the things we've designed it so that young people are right at the center. And that's been key for us. And we haven't just got sport. We've got sport and we've got arts and we've got a congress. So some people aren't into sport. Well, some people are just into cricket, but not football. But at our events, we'll have painters, photographers, textile artists, banner makers, people that create zines. And they might not be at least be interested in soccer or cricket, but they're part of this. So there's multiple entries in for people.
It's wonderful.
And I think that's served us well.
What have you learnt, though, when you've mingled and mixed with people at big established development organisations? Any things you've taken on board and actually we need to do that more?
I think they look after people better. I think as a small organisation, you can, where everyone is ridiculously committed to what you're doing, you can just keep going. And I think they're probably a bit better at looking after their staff in terms of mental health and having time off and reflection and all that. I also think some of them are much better. I know there's been a lot of controversy about data management and mailing lists and GDPR. but I think they're probably better than we are. I'm sure they are at managing their relationships and thanking people on a regular basis and managing the data, doing the ordinary, mundane stuff. It's only in, this year that we brought in an operations manager, and I've really seen how that has improved our organization and our communication with others, people that support us. I think I've felt guilty about neglecting people. Someone like Sir John Major is a patron, and Prince William. I met Sir John at an event. He's a huge cricket fan. It was ahead of the 2019 Street Child Cricket World Cup, which we held at Lord's. And he's president of the International Consortium for Street Children. I just said, "Oh, Sir John, we're doing this thing. Could you help us out?" "Oh, absolutely, sure. What do you need?" And again, each thing I've asked of him, he's done. It could be, could you come to dinner just with these 20 people to talk about what we do? And he's right there. And he's so eloquent and so generous and really loves his cricket. But I often have a panic. I was at Newlands in Cape Town last Saturday at a match, and I got up the stairs and there's Sir John, a picture of Sir John. I'm thinking, I must tell Sir John about this. But it's sort of like, I don't look after those relationships as well as I should. So there's things, I think big organizations probably have the resources to put someone on their ambassadors relationship management or something. We'll get there. I think these people are on our side, so I think they're quite forgiving of me. But we'll get there.
Hey, finally, paint a little picture of the future. How could things in a decade be different for street kids globally? What's possible?
It's possible on an individual level. Because we through these Young Leaders program, there's a bunch of them that have got really good education. They've got degrees and master's degrees, and they're really impressive young people. If you think about where they, the opportunities they didn't have as really young people. So my expectations of them are really high. We've got a girls' team and a boys' team coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we've secured university education for each of them after they leave. They don't know this yet, but they'll come to the World Cup in 26. And when they go home, they'll go on the Young Leaders program, and there's funding put aside for them to have university education. I'm interested to see what a group of young people, like 20 young people within one country, can do in terms of a country to make a difference. We've had one former participant who stood to be prime minister of their country and come fourth in the election. And I kind of think that is an inspiration. The leverage that we're getting from governments will continue. We had the senator of the Bolivian parliament with us in Doha at our General Assembly, who removed the costs of birth registration for the poorest 30% of the country in Bolivia. And during the 26th World Cup, we're having a tour of all the 12 host cities and the 2 in Canada and the 3 in Mexico with young leaders on identity. And we're culminating at the United Nations during the FIFA World Cup. The tour will finish at an event hosted by the Permanent Secretary for Qatar and something called Football for the Goals, which is a UN unit that's all about how football can help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So our target for 26 is 101 young leaders, 1,001 higher education places, and 1,000,001 identities.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I want to get the point, Phil, that when people think about a FIFA World Cup or an ICC World Cup, they think about, the Street Child World Cup is going to be there as well. What is that event going to develop and leverage for street children globally? So every time there's a World Cup, I'm going to say, well, that's going to make that difference to street children because there's a World Cup.
Fantastic. I can hear advocacy managers at not-for-profits all around the world cheering you on with some of those
thank
stories
you.
and those results. They're just amazing. Look, finally, do you have a podcast or a book or a film that you'd recommend to our listeners?
The Rest is Politics. It's not about international development, but it's about how to disagree agreeably. It's Alistair, centre left, and Rory right. Rory's just a really good explainer of stuff.
He is, isn't he?
And because he's got a development background, because he was Secretary of State, he's just, it just makes things simple for me. So that's probably the podcast I go back to most.
Very good. Well, with that, John, they think it's all over. It is now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Phil. What a joy.
Collab is a new podcast series from the International Development Unit at the New Zealand Science Institute, Plant and Food Research. Presented by me, Phil Johnstone, with original music by Miller Yule and editing by JD Lowe at Fratelli Media. For info about the impact of our Institute's international development work, visit plantandfoodresearch.com. And check out the show notes for links and how to send feedback and topic suggestions for future episodes. Thanks for listening. Till next time.